Hey guys, welcome back. It's Ripe again, back with more Reddit malicious compliance stories. In today's Ripe Stories video, my boss gave me a simple choice: commute 6 hours a day for free or get fired immediately. He thought I was just a desperate employee who would roll over and take it, but he made one simple mistake. He told me to follow company policy to the letter, and I did exactly that, and the result was pure chaos. Let's dive right into the video. And the first one is titled, "Commute 6 hours or get fired. Sure boss, enjoy my 30-minute workday." Posted on r/MaliciousCompliance. So for some context, I work as a network engineer for a technology services provider. Our company handles everything from running network cables to configuring complex server racks for corporate clients who are opening new offices or upgrading their current systems. I've been doing this job for a long time and I know the work inside and out. The compensation is decent and most of the time the daily tasks are very straightforward. However, the management at this company has always been a major problem. Specifically, my direct manager. For the sake of this story, we will just call him my boss. My boss was the kind of person who cared about one thing and one thing only: his own quarterly bonus. He didn't care about the quality of our installations, he didn't care about client satisfaction in the long term, he only cared about cutting corners, reducing costs, and making his division look incredibly profitable on a spreadsheet so he could secure a massive payout for himself. He would constantly try to deny us basic tools, argue over minor expense reports like parking fees, and just push everyone on the team to work unpaid overtime. He was a classic workplace bully, and he used threats of firing people to get his way because he knew the job market was difficult and people were deeply afraid to lose their primary source of income. I always tried to keep my head down and just do my job. I documented everything I did, kept my interactions with him as brief as possible, and focused on delivering good work for our clients. For a long time, this strategy kept me off his radar, but eventually, his greed caught up with me in a way I never expected. Our company landed a huge contract to set up the entire IT infrastructure for a new satellite office of a major financial firm. This was a massive project that required installing dozens of servers, routing hundreds of cables, and testing every single connection to ensure complete security. The catch was the location. This new office was incredibly far away from our main headquarters and my home, and the drive was exactly 3 hours in one direction under normal traffic conditions. Normally, when we get assigned to a project this far away, company policy dictates that the assigned engineers are provided with a corporate credit card for a hotel room near the site, a daily food allowance, and a rental car if needed. I mean, this makes sense. You cannot expect someone to drive 6 hours every single day and still put in a full day of demanding technical work. My boss called me into his office to assign me the project. He handed me a simple printed map to the new client location and told me I would be the lead engineer on site. I looked at the location and nodded, asking him when I should expect the travel budget approval so I could book my hotel room. He actually sat back in his chair and laughed, and he told me there was no travel budget for this project. He said the margins on the contract were too tight, and he had promised the upper management that our division could execute the setup without any additional travel expenses. I stared at him in disbelief. I asked him how exactly I was supposed to complete a project that was 3 hours away without a hotel, and he leaned forward and told me I would just have to drive. He said I was expected to drive 3 hours to the site, work a full regular 8-hour shift, and then drive 3 hours back home every single day until the project was finished. This sounded like hell on earth, a 6-hour commute. I felt my blood pressure rise already. I pointed out that this would mean 14 hours of my day dedicated to work and travel, and I asked him if I would be receiving any overtime pay for the 6 hours of daily driving, and he shook his head immediately. He told me that commuting to a job site is a normal part of being employed and the company doesn't pay for commute time. He said I was only going to be paid for the 8 hours I spent physically inside the client building, and he explicitly stated that absolutely no overtime was approved for this project under any circumstances. I tried to reason with him, and I explained that driving 6 hours a day and working 8 hours of physical labor was just unsafe. I told him I would be exhausted and the quality of the work would suffer. I asked him to just approve a cheap motel nearby. He refused and his tone turned hostile. He told me that I was being insubordinate and ungrateful. He said there were plenty of people who would gladly take my job if I didn't want it. He looked me right in the eyes and delivered his ultimatum. He said I either accept the commute and get the job done on my own dime and my own time, or I would be fired immediately for job abandonment. I was furious, but I also had a mortgage to pay and a family to support, and my wife and I rely heavily on my income. Losing my job was simply not an option at that moment. I felt backed into a corner. I grabbed the printed map from his desk, told him I would see it done, and walked out of his office. That evening, I drove home feeling completely defeated. I walked through the front door and my wife immediately knew something was wrong. We sat down in the living room and I explained the entire situation to her. I told her about the ridiculous commute, the refusal to pay for a hotel, and the denial of overtime and the explicit threat of termination. She was just as angry as I was, and we discussed our finances and realized that we couldn't afford a sudden lapse in income. We also couldn't afford the massive fuel costs and wear and tear on my personal car that a daily 6-hour commute would cause. It really felt like a completely impossible situation, but my wife is a very smart woman. She suggested that we sit down and actually read the full corporate employee handbook, not the summarized version they give you during orientation, but the massive detailed legal documents stored on the company human resources portal. She pointed out that managers like my boss often invent their own rules to save some money, hoping employees are too scared or ignorant to check the actual corporate policies. So we opened my laptop and started digging through the document. It was hundreds of pages of dry legal terminology, and we spent hours reading through sections on employee conduct, benefit structures, and expense reporting. Finally, we found the section covering travel and remote work, and I read the text carefully. The policy clearly stated that an employee normal commute to their primary assigned office is not considered paid working time. My boss was correct about that part. However, the very next paragraph changed everything. It explicitly stated that if an employee is required to travel to a temporary secondary work location, any travel time that exceeds their normal daily commute is legally considered hours worked. Furthermore, it stated that if this travel occurs during the employee normal working hours, the entire duration of the travel must be classified as paid labor. I could hardly believe what I was reading, but it got even better. We flipped to the section on employee health and safety, and the handbook strictly outlined the mandatory break policy, which was based on local labor laws. It stated that for any shift lasting 8 hours, the employee must be given a mandatory 1-hour meal break plus 2 separate mandatory 50-minute paid rest breaks, and the policy explicitly stated that management cannot force an employee to skip these breaks under any circumstances, and failure to take them could result in disciplinary action against the employee for violating safety protocols. We sat there at the kitchen table and did the math. My required shift was exactly 8 hours long. My boss had explicitly forbidden any overtime, meaning I was absolutely required to clock out the moment I hit 8 hours of paid time. According to the corporate handbook, my commute to the client site counted as paid working hours because it was a temporary secondary location, and the drive there would take 3 hours, and the mandated breaks equaled 1.5 hours total, and the drive back home would take 3 hours. 3 hours plus 1.5 hours plus 3 hours equals 7.5 hours. Out of an 8-hour shift that left exactly 30 minutes of remaining time for work. My boss had demanded I do this commute or get fired. He demanded I work exactly an 8-hour shift with no overtime, and he demanded I adhere to company policy. And I realized right then and there that I was gonna give him exactly what he asked for. I was gonna comply with his demands to the absolute letter. The first day of the new project arrived, and normally I would wake up incredibly early to beat the traffic for a job this far away, but not today. My regular shift begins at a standard morning hour. I woke up at my usual time, enjoyed a nice breakfast with my wife, and walked out to my car just as my official shift began. I sent a quick email to my boss from my phone, making sure to BCC my personal email as well. I stated that I was officially clocking in for my shift and beginning the assigned commute to the secondary job site as demanded. I started the engine, began the drive, and I put on a very long historical podcast, set my cruise control. And by the way, guys, just to quickly interject here, instead of historical podcasts, I would recommend going to Spotify or Apple Podcasts and searching for Ripe Stories, and you will get the freshest Ripe content you can imagine. and I enjoyed a surprisingly relaxing morning. I hit some standard highway traffic, which slowed me down a bit, but I was not stressed at all. I was getting paid my full engineering hourly rate simply to sit in my comfortable car and listen to people talk about ancient history. 3 hours later, I pulled into the parking lot of the new client office. I walked into the building and met with the local facility manager. He was a nice guy who was eager to get their network up and running, and he showed me the empty server room and pointed to the massive piles of unboxed equipment sitting in the corner. He asked me where I wanted to start. I looked at him, smiled politely, and told him that according to my company's strict safety protocols, I just completed 3 straight hours of continuous paid labor by driving, and I was legally mandated to take my first 50-minute rest break before beginning physical work. The facility manager looked a bit confused, but he shrugged and said that was fine. I walked out to my car, sat there for exactly 50 minutes, then walked back inside, and I opened my toolkit. I unboxed one single router, mounted it into the server rack, plugged in a power cable, and I connected exactly 3 network cables to the main switch. I ran a quick diagnostic check on my laptop to ensure the router was receiving power, and I looked at my watch. Exactly 30 minutes had passed since my break ended. I closed my laptop, I turned to the facility manager and told him that it was now time for my mandatory 1-hour meal break. His eyes widened in surprise. He pointed out that I had only been there for about 45 minutes total. I nodded sympathetically. I explained that I was simply following the strict labor schedule provided by my employer and I was not authorized to deviate from it. I left the server room, walked out to my car, drove to a nearby sandwich shop. I sat in a booth, ate a very slow and relaxing meal, and read a few articles on my phone. When my hour was up, I drove back to the client office. I walked into the server room. The facility manager was standing there looking frustrated. Before he could even ask me to continue wiring the rack, I informed him that I now needed to take my second mandated 50-minute rest break. He just stared at me. He didn't say a word. I stood in the hallway outside the server room for exactly 15 minutes, and when the break was over, I walked back into the room, began packing up my toolkit. The facility manager finally spoke up and he asked me what on earth I was doing. He pointed out the massive pile of equipment that still needed to be installed. I zipped up my bag and explained the situation to him very clearly. I told him that my boss had explicitly forbidden any overtime for this project and my daily shift was capped at exactly 8 hours. I'd spent 3 hours driving here, 1.5 hours on mandatory breaks, and 30 minutes working. That equaled 5 hours. The drive back to my home would take exactly 3 hours. If I stayed even 1 minute longer, I would hit overtime on my drive home, which would violate my direct orders. I told him I would see him tomorrow, and I walked out the door. I got back into my car, put on another podcast, and drove 3 hours back home. I pulled into my driveway exactly as my 8-hour shift ended. I sent another mail to my boss stating that my shift was now complete, and I was clocking out for the day. The second day was exactly the same as the first one. I drove for 3 hours. Then I took my break, I unboxed exactly 1 server unit, slid it into the rack and tightened the screws. I took my lunch, I took my second break, I packed my bag and drove 3 hours home. By the third day, the storm finally hit. I was about 2 hours into my morning drive when my phone started ringing endlessly. The caller ID showed it was my boss. Company safety policy strictly forbids employees from answering phone calls or looking at screens while operating a vehicle on company time, though. So naturally, I let it ring. He called 6 times in a row. Every single call went to voicemail, and when I finally arrived at the client site and parked my car, I checked my messages. My boss had left several frantic, furious voicemails demanding I call him back immediately. I walked into the building. The facility manager was waiting for me in the lobby, and he did not look happy. He told me he had called my boss that morning to complain about the complete lack of progress on the installation. He had accurately reported that the lead engineer was arriving midday, working for a fraction of an hour, and then leaving. I thanked the facility manager for his transparency, took my mandatory 15 minutes break in the lobby, and then dialed my boss' number. He answered on the first ring and immediately started screaming. He accused me of time theft and he accused me of job abandonment. He said the client was furious and threatening to cancel the contract. He told me I was fired, effective immediately, and demanded that I drive the company equipment back to headquarters, but I stayed completely calm. I simply told him that I was executing the project exactly according to his explicit instructions and the official corporate employee handbook, and I reminded him that he had threatened to fire me if I didn't accept this commute, and he had strictly forbidden any overtime, and he screamed that commuting does not count as work hours. I calmly advised him to check the corporate policy regarding travel to secondary work locations, and I also advised him that since he was officially terminating my employment, I would be forwarding my documented hours, his written mails denying my hotel stay, and his strict orders forbidding overtime to the Corporate Human Resources Department as well as the State Labor Board to ensure my final paycheck accurately reflected my compliance with his directives. There was a very long, very heavy silence on the other end of this line, and the screaming stopped. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head as he realized the massive legal and financial liability he had just created for the company. He quietly told me not to move, not to leave the site, and to wait for a phone call from Human Resources, and then he hung up. I went into the server room and worked my standard 30 minutes, and just as I was packing up for my lunch break, my phone rang. It was the director of human resources from our main corporate office, and the human resources director sounded incredibly stressed. She asked me to explain exactly what was happening at the client site, and I laid it all out for her clearly and professionally. I told her about the initial meeting with my boss, and I told her about the ultimatum. I referenced the exact pages and clause numbers in the corporate handbook and regarding paid travel time and mandatory breaks. I explained the simple math of the 8-hour shift, and I then calmly mentioned that I had a paper trail of mails from my boss demanding I make this commute on my own time and explicitly denying any travel expenses or overtime. The Human Resources Director asked me to hold. I was placed on hold for almost 20 minutes, and I assumed she was having a very intense conversation with my boss. When she finally came back on the line, her tone had completely changed though. It was no longer stressed, it was now apologetic and highly accommodating. She informed me that there had been a severe miscommunication regarding the travel budget for this project, and she stated that my boss was mistaken when he told me there were no funds available. She assured me that the company fully values my time and my safety, and she then told me that a corporate credit card had just been authorized in my name. She had personally booked me into a very nice hotel just 10 minutes away from the client site for the remainder of the project, and she also approved a generous daily food allowance for me, which was awesome, and authorized me to work as much overtime as was necessary to get the project back on schedule and appease the angry client. She asked me if this arrangement was satisfactory and if I'd be willing to stay on the job. I smiled even though she couldn't see it. I told her that this arrangement sounded perfectly reasonable and I would be happy to continue the installation under these new terms. She thanked me profusely and told me my boss would be handling other matters for the time being and I was to report directly to her until the project was finished. I spent the next 3 weeks living in a comfortable hotel room, eating excellent meals on the company dime, and working significant overtime hours to successfully complete the network installation. And the client was ultimately very happy with the quality of the work and the network functioned flawlessly. When I finally returned to the main office, my boss was noticeably absent. I later found out that the Human Resources Director and upper management had conducted a thorough review of his recent projects and they discovered that he had been systematically violating labor policies and denying legitimate expenses to artificially inflate his division profit margins. So, because his actions had nearly cost the company a massive client and exposed them to severe legal risks regarding unpaid wages, he was quietly let go from the company. I kept my job, got paid for every single hour of my time, and never had to deal with his ridiculous demands again. Sometimes, following the rules exactly as written is just the most effective way to solve a problem. And yeah guys, honestly, you gotta appreciate the stupidity of this boss. I love how he thought that he was some kind of ruthless corporate mastermind, only to then get instantly dismantled by a guy who actually just bothered to read the PDF they email you on orientation day. Reading comprehension really saves lives and can destroy bad managers, at least in this case. But then again, honestly, the wife is the MVP here. A lot of people would have just said, "Oh, that sucks," and then moved on, but she went straight to, "Let's read the actual policy." That's the kind of partner you want when your manager is trying to make you donate 6 hours of your life every single day. And by the way, let me know what do you think about this story in the comments and what you would have done if you were in OP's shoes. And a user in the comments said, "Getting paid a full network engineer salary to drive around listening to history podcasts is unironically my dream job. This man accidentally invented the best gig in America. Clock in from your driveway, 6 hours of hardcore history, a leisurely sandwich, install one router with the unhurried confidence of a man who cannot legally be rushed, and then drive home." And by the way, guys, quick side fact here that just came to my mind. Recently, there are a lot of World War II history videos being posted to YouTube, and I can tell you almost all of these videos that were posted in, let's say, the last 2 to maybe 6 months are pretty much AI slop. There are websites nowadays that can create hours of these videos complete with footage and everything. So yeah, be very careful when you listen to these World War II history videos. There are a lot of people making a crap load of money with this AI slop content. And the next Reddit comment said, people saying that you should have just gone to HR first are missing something important here. HR exists to protect the company, not you. If OP had walked in one day saying, oh, my boss is making me commute 6 hours unpaid, it becomes a he said, she said situation, and suddenly OP is the difficult employee with a target on his back, and we have all seen before how that can go. What OP simply did instead was create undeniable documented evidence, and that certainly helped him. And the next one is another fantastic malicious compliance story that you don't want to miss. It is titled The Refund. So I've been ordering groceries from Walmart for the last year since I've been unable to get a caregiver and I have a compromised immune system. If you get a cold, it kills me, variety. I also have a broken back and a condition that makes me dislocate every bone when I move. I've transitioned into frozen dinners to not starve, and I cannot just eat anything, so my body is terrible at being alive. I get food assistance and the SNAP system of EBT uses a debit card style system. I have only had 2 orders without issues in the last year, and instead of the food I've ordered things, I received range from a plastic food locker full of marshmallows to airborne allergens that put me in the hospital because instead of the egg, cheese, potato bowl, someone went, "This customer needs a ready-made cucumber salad, this is the same." It's so reliable, a thing that my neighbors wait for my text listing their available free food options. This week, it is pineapple mango juice. By the way, I'm allergic to pineapple, but I pretty quickly mastered the refund system. After the 3rd time, however, the system started making me call every single time. Then I was told, you need to open a dispute with your card holder. Are you sure? I'm only missing a $5 item. Yes, we no longer believe you're missing items. Me, I just sent you photographs of everything in the bags. You admit I didn't order those mushrooms. Why are you saying I lied? Too many returns. So then I call up the EBT system and detail everything. I offer the photos of every single order, and at this point I had 3 they were refusing refunds on. It just took 4 weeks for anyone to actually talk to me. I'd been hung up on so many times. EBT does not need my evidence. We get this call all the time. I see partial refunds on 2 of these, so they will automatically refund the whole order, and our investigation team will look at the others. If they do need that evidence, we will call you. Well, I woke up to full refunds for 6 orders because in investigation they decided that I should have those others too, so Walmart paid me back $800 instead of $5. The best part is though, they are not making me call EBT to refund, they just do it now, and I know I can have a nice meal on my birthday. And for some variety, the next one is from r/petty revenge and is titled, My Dad's Petty Revenge on 2 Rude French Tourists. So I've posted here before, and this didn't happen to me but to my dad. For context, we are Chinese Indonesian, and back in the 90s, my dad once spent about 2 weeks backpacking across Europe. And in each country he visited, he had a small tradition of getting a simple tattoo as a memory, usually something like a flag or a small symbol. While he was in Helsinki, he went into a tattoo shop to get a Finnish flag done on his back. When he arrived, there were already a couple of French tourists ahead of him. They were loud, rude, and clearly making themselves a problem, talking over people and acting like they were entitled to special treatment, while the staff remained polite and professional. At some point, while his friend was getting his tattoo done, one of them asked my dad in English if he was Chinese, to which my dad said yes. The French guy said he had always wanted to have a cool Chinese character tattooed on him and asked my dad to write down the Chinese character for love on a piece of paper for reference. Instead of writing what the man asked for, he wrote a set of Chinese characters that definitely did not mean love. The tattoo artist was probably too overwhelmed to double-check the reference and did the tattoo anyway, or he just had enough of their rudeness and wanted them gone too. To this day though, my dad still has no idea if that man ever found out what the tattoo actually meant. I kind of hope he did. My dad still laughs after all these years whenever he tells the story. Oh, and by the way, the tattoo read some Chinese character, by the way, which roughly translates to stupid idiot. Thank you so much for watching. Please check out my playlist on the left if you cannot get enough of my content, and I will see you again tomorrow.